Imagine walking into a bank and writing a check for $35 trillion, knowing you have zero intention of ever paying it back. In the real world, that is called grand larceny. In Washington, D.C., that is simply called Tuesday. The United States is now adding $1 trillion of debt every 100 days. We spend more on interest payments than we do on our entire military. The mathematics is not just broken, it is dead. This crime scene began in 1971, but in 2025 they are finally preparing to hide the body. Is the proposed strategic Bitcoin reserve a genius plan to save the dollar? Or is it the ultimate trap for the common citizen? Let's decode the system. Before we go any further, you must understand one fundamental truth. The inflation you feel at the gas pump and the grocery store is not a tragic accident of history. It is a deliberate, calculated strategy known as a silent default. Most people think a government goes bankrupt like a person does, by stopping payments and closing its doors. But a superpower with a printing press never has to admit failure. Instead, they choose to pay back every single dollar they owe, but with dollars that have had their soul sucked out. It is a mathematical sleight of hand where the numbers on your screen stay the same, but the energy those numbers can buy vanishes into thin air. This machine of quiet theft operates through three core mechanisms: financial repression, currency debasement, and asset inflation. First, financial repression keeps interest rates lower than the real rate of inflation, effectively forcing you to lose money just by holding it in a bank. Second, currency debasement occurs as the Federal Reserve prints trillions to fund government spending, diluting the supply and making each existing dollar less rare, and therefore less valuable. Finally, asset inflation creates a paradise for the elite. While your wages struggle to keep up with the price of milk, the stocks and real estate owned by the wealthy skyrocket, fueled by the very money printing that is impoverishing you. The logic is brutally simple. The government borrowed money from you years ago when a dollar could buy a steak. Today they are giving that dollar back, but it can only buy a candy bar. They have technically fulfilled their promise, but they have legally stolen your time and labor. This is not a bug in the financial system. It is the primary feature designed to keep the national debt from exploding while the public remains blissfully unaware of who is actually picking their pockets. But to understand why this theft is not only legal, but considered a standard operating procedure, we have to go back to the original crime scene. The modern era of financial instability began on a quiet Sunday evening, August 15, 1971, at Camp David. President Richard Nixon stepped before the cameras to announce what he called a temporary measure to protect the dollar. He suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold, effectively slamming the gold window shut. This was the birth of the fiat system, a world where money is no longer a claim on a tangible asset, but a currency backed only by government decree. The background of this decision was not a stroke of genius, but a desperate move to cover a massive hole in the balance sheet. Between the skyrocketing costs of the Vietnam War and the expensive social programs of the Great Society, the United States was running out of gold to back its spending. Foreign nations, sensing the weakness, began demanding their gold back, and Nixon had to stop the bleeding before the vaults were empty. The solution chosen was fiat currency, paper money that could be printed at will. However, a currency with no gold needs a new reason for the world to trust it. That reason was the petrodollar system. By ensuring that every nation on Earth had to use US dollars to buy oil, the government created a global artificial demand for their new paper. This allowed the United States to export its inflation to the rest of the world and borrow infinite amounts of money to fund deficits without the political suicide of raising taxes. This is the exact origin of the vertical parabolic debt curve we see today. By removing the discipline of gold, the government removed the brakes on the printing press, turning the national debt into a runaway train that has now reached $34 trillion. For 50 years, the paper game worked because the world had no other choice. But now the era of unquestioned faith is ending, as nations reject the paper and look for a digital fortress. Enter the new solution. To navigate the wreckage of the current system, the elite are quietly pivoting to a dual asset strategy, a two-pronged defense designed to protect the state while the public holds the bag. This is not a plan to pay off the debt, but to wrap the failing dollar in a fortress of hard assets. The first mechanism is the liquidity sponge, better known as the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Under a proposal gaining traction in the Senate, the United States would acquire 1 million Bitcoin, creating a high-energy vacuum for global liquidity. When the Federal Reserve is forced to print trillions more to prevent a collapse, this excess money is channeled into a digital asset held on the national balance sheet instead of flooding the economy and causing hyperinflation in consumer goods. By absorbing speculative capital, Bitcoin transforms from a threat to the system into a controlled asset that captures global wealth while the dollar's purchasing power continues its slow descent. The second mechanism is the trust anchor, or the strategic revaluation of gold. The United States still claims to hold over 8,000 tons of gold, officially valued at a ridiculous $42 per ounce. When the faith in paper currency finally evaporates, the government has the power to revalue this gold to its true market price. This overnight accounting shift would instantly create trillions of dollars in equity, helping to offset national debt and signaling to the world that while the dollar may be paper, the collateral behind the nation is solid gold. The final mechanism is the hegemon shift, the ultimate move of the elite. In this endgame, the state and the wealthy hold the hard assets, gold and Bitcoin, while the general public is left using a depreciating fiat currency for daily transactions. This ensures the government can continue running deficits, while its national wealth is protected in assets that skyrocket in value as the dollar falls. You might think this is just a theory born in the corners of the internet, but look at what they are actually writing into law. To see that this shift is no longer a fringe theory, one must look at the halls of the United States Senate. A concrete example of this unfolding reality is the Bitcoin Act of 2024, introduced by Senator Cynthia Lummis. Officially titled the Boosting Innovation, Technology, and Competitiveness Through Optimized Investment Nationwide Act, this legislation provides a formal legal framework for the government to strategically acquire and manage Bitcoin. As the national debt spirals past $35 trillion, increasing by $1 trillion every 100 days, the system has proposed a radical survival plan, purchasing up to 5% of the total global Bitcoin supply, 1 million coins, to be held for a minimum of 20 years. This gold-like digital age asset is intended to serve as a national security hedge against economic instability and monetary debasement. The result of this legislative push is a profound reclassification of Bitcoin, upgrading it from a volatile speculative asset to a strategic pillar of national financial security, sitting alongside gold and land. This institutional pivot is mirrored by Wall Street's elite. BlackRock's Larry Fink has performed a complete 180-degree turn, now referring to Bitcoin as a flight to safety rather than a vehicle for money laundering. This is the ultimate proof that the smart money has smelled the smoke in the room. They realize that when the current system hits its mathematical limit, you either own the assets that the government is forced to pump, or you are the one paying for the pump through your loss of purchasing power. The Act even mandates a proof of reserve system to ensure transparency, showing that the state is preparing for a new era of cryptographic accountability because the old era of trust is dead. But do not be fooled into thinking this is merely an American phenomenon. The US is not alone in this desperate scramble for hard assets. The virus has spread. As time passes, this high-stakes game of financial musical chairs is no longer confined to the marble halls of Washington, D.C. We are witnessing the evolution of a global race for hard assets, a phenomenon driven by a rational management of risk as the full faith and credit of the US dollar begins to fracture. This contagion of distrust has spread to the BRICS nations, where central banks from China to the Middle East are quietly offloading US treasuries, realizing that holding American debt is now a guaranteed loss in real value. In their place, they are accumulating gold at record-breaking speeds, seeking to anchor their economies in something that cannot be printed or weaponized through sanctions. The logic of this post-dollar world is also manifesting in the digital realm. El Salvador has already pioneered the Bitcoin City model, treating the cryptocurrency as a functional escape asset from a collapsing monetary order. This is no longer just a trend for small nations or conspiracy theorists. It has reached the institutional core, with state pension funds and massive investment firms beginning to diversify into the same digital fortress. The global financial order is shifting toward a multipolar, multi-asset reality, where the rules will be written by those who possess the most tangible collateral. The United States is forced into this Bitcoin race not out of a love for innovation, but out of strategic necessity. To maintain its lead, Washington cannot allow rivals like China or Russia to dominate the next generation of financial infrastructure. By treating Bitcoin as a high-energy vacuum for global liquidity, the U.S. administration is attempting to convert a potential competitor into a controlled asset, absorbing global capital before its adversaries can do the same. The era of unquestioned paper dominance is over. We have entered a period where only hard assets, gold for the old world and Bitcoin for the new, will determine who survives the coming reset. So the titans are fighting for the last lifeboats. Where does that leave you? Today you do not need a PhD in economics to feel the tightening grip of this system on your daily life. You feel it every time your paycheck buys less than it did the month before, despite working just as hard. The uncomfortable truth is that simply by holding your hard-earned cash in a traditional bank account, you are already being subjected to a hidden, non-negotiable inflation tax. While the headlines focus on political theater, a massive silent default is being executed through the erosion of your purchasing power. The government pays back its debts in full, but it does so with diluted currency that has been stripped of its value before it ever reaches your pocket. This is the Cantillon effect in action. New money is injected at the top for the elites, while you are left to deal with the resulting price hikes at the bottom. If this strategic pivot toward a dual-asset fortress of gold and Bitcoin succeeds, the implications for the average person are staggering. As the US government and global elites aggressively accumulate these finite hard assets to secure their own balance sheets, their market values are likely to skyrocket. Meanwhile, the US dollar in your wallet will continue its programmed descent, serving its primary role as a medium for daily transactions rather than a store of wealth. You are currently standing on the wrong side of the largest wealth transfer in human history. The state is building a lifeboat out of gold and cryptographic code, but they aren't building one for you. You are being conditioned to accept a world where you own nothing and are happy, while the sovereign entities secure the only assets that will matter in a post-fiat world. By the time the general public realizes that the rules of the game have changed, the doors to the digital and physical vaults will already be locked. You have to realize that the system is designed to save the sovereign, not the citizen. And here is the most important point you must take away from this investigation. This fundamental shift in the American financial architecture is not happening because politicians like Donald Trump or Cynthia Lummis have suddenly become fans of cryptocurrency. It is not a matter of personal preference or partisan ideology. This system is changing because mathematics does not lie, and the current path has reached a terminal velocity. The $35 trillion national debt is no longer a burden that can be paid off through hard work or traditional taxes. In a world of exponential interest, that debt can only be restructured, a polite financial term for burning down the old house and moving into a new one built on harder collateral. The strategic Bitcoin reserve and the revaluation of gold are not optional experiments. They are the final maneuvers of a state that realizes its paper currency is a dying technology. The history of monetary collapses teaches us that when the debt-to-GDP ratio enters this death spiral, the government's only survival mechanism is to seize or control the assets that will retain value after the reset. They are moving to secure the digital gold and the physical bullion, because they know the faith and credit of the dollar is no longer enough to keep the engine running. For the self-educated investor, the question is no longer, is Bitcoin risky? Or is gold too old-fashioned? In the cold light of this reality, the only question that matters is, what is the risk of not owning insurance while the ship is taking on water? The elites are showing you exactly what they are afraid of by what they are trying to accumulate. They are moving toward a multipolar, multi-asset reality, where trust is replaced by cryptography and physical scarcity. We are not just witnessing a change in policy, we are witnessing the inevitable surrender of the paper dollar to the laws of mathematics. The United States will not collapse in the way the movies predict. History shows that empires do not simply vanish, they adapt. But that adaptation comes at a price, and that price is always paid by the purchasing power of the middle class. The strategic Bitcoin reserve and the revaluation of gold are not lifeboats for you, they are the armor the state is putting on to survive the storm it created. The empire always survives by sacrificing the commoner. In 1971, those who understood the gain moved into gold and protected their legacy. Those who believed the government's promise of temporary measures watched their savings evaporate over the next 50 years. Today, the ghost of 1971 is knocking on the door again, but this time it is carrying a digital ledger. The rules of money are being rewritten in real time, and once the ink is dry, the window of opportunity will be welded shut. Are you listening, or are you waiting for permission to notice the house is on fire? If you have seen the pattern, leave a 1 in the comments. Subscribe to Financial Money History. In our next investigation, we open the classified files on the families who truly own the Federal Reserve.